Thank you very much. And when you become a vegetarian, if you choose to do a vegetarian lifestyle, generally the first question that's asked, anybody that is not a vegetarian will say, well, where are you going to get your protein? As if protein was something that came only from animals. So this is one of the things we're going to look at first is the protein myth. Where do we get protein from? Where do animals get protein? And also, we're going to look at the epidemic that is happening in the world in the industrial nations, and that is diabetes. So protein and diabetes. We must always, in every presentation I share with you, is the laws of health. Even if we're just talking about protein or any disease, we again have to go back and we have to examine these laws of health. These are what govern your life expectancy, how well you're going to live life. And of course, when we look at diabetes and we look at protein is primarily nutrition, but when we look at diabetes, it's going to be nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, air, rest, trust, and divine power. So it'll be them all. So as we go on, let's consider, first of all, why do we need complex carbohydrates? There is a big desire now in the world, especially, again, the industrial nations, to do these special diets, these high-protein diets and low-carbohydrate diets. But complex carbohydrates are 100% energy. Every part of it is used. There's no waste involved. There's no waste in processing it. It is the perfect food. So when sufficient carbohydrates are available, little protein needs to be taken in. If not enough carbohydrates are eaten, then the body uses protein for energy. But only 58% of protein is usable and only 10% of fat for energy. The rest is waste and the body has to deal with it. So the body does not like to use protein or fat for energy. The only time it will is if you are starving. If you're on a starvation diet or you're in a situation where you're not getting enough food, then the body will do it. It'll start consuming its own flesh. So here are the essential elements for nutrition. First of all, we need complex carbohydrates, and this should compose a good portion of your diet, 70 to 80% of your diet. Then we need some fats. We need a little bit of protein. Also, we need vitamins, minerals. One more thing. What do you think that one more thing is? Any idea? Well, it's water. Also part of nutrition. So here's a SAD state. We call it the SAD diet. The ideal diet is on the left here, and standard American diet, or the SAD diet, is on the right. So the ideal diet should be 1 to 25% of your calories. Now this is of your calories, 1 to 25% of your calories from fat, and 75 of that should be unsaturated. 5% of the calories from protein, and 70 to 90% of calories from unrefined carbohydrates, and mostly complex. But when we look at the standard American diet, it's about 37% fat, and 80 to 90% of that fat is saturated, 12% protein, 27% carbohydrates, mostly refined, and 24% sugar. So that's a SAD diet. So we need that information to be able to figure out how much protein we're going to eat. When we look at complex carbohydrates, we must realize that this is brain food. This is nerve food, muscle food. So they come from plants. So where do carbohydrates come from? Plants. They're plant food. Okay, half the calories of fat and sugar and starches are carbohydrates. So you know that most of the world, about 60% of the world, are vegetarians, and the primary source of food is sweet potato. a starch. So protein, it comes, it's the word proteos, the Greek word proteos, which means of prime importance. Well, that's true. Life is the basis of life. Life springs from protein. It's made up of it's a chemical substances, nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur. You mix them together and you form amino acids, and then you mix those amino acids together and you have protein, either plant protein or animal protein. We have 23 different amino acids we know of. Only we use 20 of those. We use 20 of those amino acids.
And so my own research was focused on protein, making sure we got enough. It was considered to be the vital nutrient. It was one of the first nutrients discovered. And without protein, the animal would die. So it was a life force. And in fact, in the early 1900s, there were statements made that this is the stuff of civilization itself.
Protein was also nearly synonymous with animal-based foods like meat. It still is today, all over America.
Why do you think meat is important in our diet?
Protein.
Protein?
Protein.
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 A lot of protein.
We need protein, don't we? Can't live without protein.
The idea that plants had protein also didn't come into play until maybe the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then it struggled through the year.
So it wasn't until the late 1800s, 1900s that we realized that protein came from plants. So the air, we get carbon dioxide from the earth, we get nitrogen and water, combine those into essential and non-essential amino acids. That makes plant protein. Then comes along a man or an animal and eats that plant. Then our bodies break that protein down into essential, non-essential amino acids and make animal or human protein. The difficulty comes is when a man then eats that animal that ate the vegetables and then tries to make protein from it. So now we have a little difficulty because we start producing some strong byproducts that are harmful to the body because of that third source. And it's always essential that when you're looking for nutrition, you try to go to the primary source. If you want calcium, try to go to wherever the primary source of that calcium. You want iron, you want protein, you need carbohydrates, go to the primary source. So here, the primary source of protein is plants. Again, protein is the building block for growth, repair, maintenance, and synthesizes the enzymes, hormones, and antibodies. So when we're looking at protein, how much protein do we need? Well, one of the most ideal way of doing that is to look at the mother's milk of each animal, and that will tell you what the protein intake should be for that animal. And what we do is look at the mother's milk, how much protein's in it, and how long it takes to double the birth weight of that animal. So human is only 1.2 grams of protein in the milk, and it takes 120 days to double the birth rate. But as you go down, the horse, the cow, the goat, the dog, the cat, the rat, you see that the protein is increased. And every time the natural protein of the milk is increased, the weight of the doubling weight of the individual is shortened. For instance, with a horse, the protein is doubled to 2.4, and it takes only 60 days for the birth weight to double. So we are designed for a low-protein diet. It takes us a long time to mature. We don't consider, let's say, a male, until really mature until 25. Well, how long does it take a horse or a cow to mature? Okay. It used to be in the 1800s that a girl wasn't able to produce a child till she was 16. Her maturity rate was 16. But you have cattle and horses, and these things are producing within 2 years, 3 years. They're breedable. And if you get down to rats and cats and dogs, we're talking a much shorter time, year, months, because of the increased protein. So, again, to figure out how much protein we need, let's look at the ideal diet, and we see that we need 5% of our calories from protein. Now, fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Fats are 9 calories per gram, carbohydrates 4, proteins 4. So now we know that of calories, carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram. So now we can figure out how many grams of protein we need to eat. So let's take a 2,500 calorie diet, which is a pretty good calorie diet. 5% of that should be from protein, so that gives us 125 calories. Now, let's take 4 calories per gram of the protein divided into 125. So that says that we should get 31.25 grams of protein a day. That's the ideal. So, we have the essential and non-essential amino acids. What makes the difference? What makes something essential an amino acid? Well, when it says essential, that means that we must eat it. The other 12, because there's 8 of those, the other 12, our intestinal tract manufactures the rest of those amino acids, okay, from the foods we eat. So we have to make sure whenever we determine how much protein is in something, we look at those 8 essential amino acids. Those are the 8 things that we have to eat. So on the right of this picture is the recommended daily amount of those 8 essential amino acids. On the left is 2,500 calories of sweet potatoes. Can you get enough protein if all you could eat was sweet potatoes? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, how about brown rice? Can you get enough? Absolutely. How about rolled oats? Quite well, huh? Plenty of protein, if that's all you could eat. White beans. White beans actually have more protein than steak. So, plenty of protein. How about broccoli? One of the highest. Look at the amount of protein in 2,500 calories of broccoli. But you have to realize that that's a lot of pounds of broccoli. You wouldn't eat that much, but we don't lack protein. Here's a list from broccoli, asparagus, white beans, rolled oats, corn, whole wheat flour, pumpkin, tomatoes, brown rice, baked potato, sweet potato. All of them, 2,500 calories, have more protein. Double, sometimes triple the amount of protein we need in 2,500 calories. So let's take an example. In the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, we called it the Dust Bowl time, depression in the United States. In the central part of the United States, the Midwest, many people lived for a couple years on white potatoes. Just plain old potatoes. That's all they had. Do you know, from that period of time, we have no deficiencies? There is no recorded disease associated with that simple diet of sweet potatoes, or of white potatoes, because there was plenty of nutrients in it. Now let's look at a bunch of food here, and you'll notice that apple, banana, oranges, baked potato, brown rice, corn, whole wheat, cabbage, chickpeas, pinto beans, they all have, this is per 100 calories, they all have protein in it. You can look to the right, that's all the animal products. What I'm saying to you is any food, decent food, any food we're supposed to eat, should eat, has protein in it. You really don't have to worry about protein. So, The ingestion of protein supplements by athletes who eat an otherwise well-balanced diet is of no use in bodybuilding programs. Athletes need the same amount of protein foods as non-athletes. Protein does not increase strength. Indeed, it often takes greater energy to digest and metabolize the excess protein. From the Journal of the American Medical Association. Here is a study done in 19 countries looking at lymph gland cancer and animal protein. So they were looking at how much each country consumes bovine, which is cow protein, and the association with lymph gland cancer. So we can see that the greater amount of cow eaten, the greater the amount of lymph gland cancer. There's a direct dose relationship between the consumption of this meat and lymph gland cancer. Now, this is a very interesting study. What it did was it was looking at, they took athletes, young athletes, and this is actually two studies. The study done in the 1930s was with 48 grams of protein a day and 142 grams, those two amounts. And they looked at how much calcium was either retained in the body or excreted from the body. And those that ate 48 grams of protein a day actually assimilated 20 milligrams of calcium a day. Those that ate 142 grams of protein a day lost about 70 milligrams of calcium a day. So, to see if this study was correct, in the 1970s they repeated the same study, but they added a third category, which was 95 grams of protein a day. And those that ate 95 grams of protein a day lost 30 milligrams of calcium a day. So, as we will see, every study ever done on osteoporosis, which is hardening of the arteries, is the thinning of the bones, the hardening of the bones, is related to too much protein consumed, animal protein. This is the calcium protein imbalance of the zone diet. The zone diet is the same thing as the Atkins diet or the LA diet. And what this is it's a high protein, low carbohydrate diet. So most of them, as you can see, they lost, they were consuming 500 milligrams of calcium a day. In the first study, they were eating 95 grams of protein, and they lost 58 milligrams of protein a day, or of calcium a day. The same with 800 milligrams of calcium. They ate 95 grams of protein. They gained 1 milligram of calcium a day. So in all these studies, even the last two, you can see they're eating 1,400 milligrams of calcium a day. These last studies were done with athletes. They ate 142 or 141 grams of protein a day, but they both lost. They lost either 65 milligrams of calcium or 84 milligrams of calcium. So if you want to protect yourself from osteoporosis, then you need to eat a low protein diet, high carbohydrate diet. If you look through different countries, from China and so forth, the osteoporosis is not present there because they have a very low protein diet, high carbohydrate diet. Here's the Atkins diet. It's the same thing. You have to realize that the Atkins diet, this came out in the 70s, but there's never been any long-term study done on the Atkins diet. No one can stay on it a long period of time. Kidneys will fail. You'll get all kinds of problems. And there's very low calcium intake and very high protein intake in this diet. If you stay on it, you're going to have osteoporosis. Now, this is another study done, and they were looking at the amount of calcium per nation, per country, consumed, average amount of calcium consumed, and the relationship with hip fracture. And hip fracture is the denote for osteoporosis. Most people, they'll talk about their grandmother or somebody that has osteoporosis. They say she fell and her hip broke. Well, really what happens is the hip breaks and then you fall. And that's osteoporosis. So they looked at these countries and the amount of calcium taken in and the amount of hip fracture. And the more calcium consumed, the more hip fracture there was. Now, why is that? We look at the highest: Norway, Sweden, New Zealand, Finland, Denmark, United States, United Kingdom, Holland, England. What are we talking about? These are high consumers of dairy products. So their calcium is coming from dairy. And they have the highest hip fracture rates. The highest hip fracture rate, which is not on here, is the American Eskimos, Alaskan Eskimos. And they consume about 2,500 milligrams of calcium a day. But they also consume about 250 grams of protein a day. And their calcium is coming from bones, fish bones, and so forth. So we need high calcium intake, but we need it from the vegetable source. Where do we get it? Let's look at it. Calcium in common foods, the vegetable foods. Here, oatmeal, 1 cup, lentils, 1 cup, rutabagas, dandelion greens. They have either 19, 38, 115, 147 milligrams of calcium. Mustard greens, sesame seed, blackstrap molasses. Just 2 tablespoons of blackstrap molasses have 176 milligrams of calcium, or 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons of sesame. Also, if we look at whole milk, halfway down this slide, we see that whole milk, 1 cup, is 200 milligrams of calcium. But you have to realize that about 80, 70, 80, 90% of that is not going to be able to be absorbed in your intestinal tract. But you have higher calcium per cup for carob flour or lamb's quarters. So figs, only 10 figs, 269 milligrams. We have readily available, usable calcium in the vegetable kingdom. Now, most people don't know what lamb's quarters is, so I included a picture. Here's lamb's quarters young. And this powdery stuff on the top is very common, at least in the south of the United States. Here's when it's a little hotter out and it gets a little older. So it's putting a little purple around the edges. This is a very good green when it's young to put in salads. A little older, you can steam it, and it's the best tasting spinach you've ever had, with no oxalic acid and lots of calcium. Now let's look at diabetes.
Cases of diabetes are skyrocketing, particularly among our younger population.
Diabetes.
Life-threatening diabetes.
1 out of 3 people born in the U.S. today will develop this crippling condition during their lifetime. Millions of others suffer from a host of degenerative diseases. Millions more of us are so stimulated by sugar, coffee, and energy drinks that we've masked our chronic fatigue. But could there be a single solution to all of these problems? A solution so comprehensive, yet so straightforward, that it's mind-boggling that more of us haven't taken it seriously?
Someone has to stand up and say that the answer isn't another pill. The answer is spinach.
A growing number of researchers claim that if we eliminate or greatly reduce refined, processed, and animal-based foods, we can prevent, and in certain cases even reverse, several of our worst diseases. They say all we need to do is adopt a whole foods, plant-based diet. It sounds almost too simple to be true.
So diabetes. Diabetes is an epidemic in the United States. Approximately 16 million Americans are diabetic. 50% of them are unaware. Approximately 625,000 new cases are diagnosed per year. 6% of those 45 to 64 years old, or as many as 20% of those over 65, have diabetes. Total cost, $90 to $130 billion per year.
At least 17 million Americans now have type 2 diabetes, about 1 out of every 20 people.
If the diabetes starts before the age of 15, you lose somewhere between 17 and 27 years of lifespan.
According to the new research, the direct medical costs associated with diabetes have doubled. The direct medical costs have doubled in the past 5 years, from $44 billion in 1997 to $92 billion in 2002.
And somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20% of the obese children have elevated abnormal liver function tests. And we have now started a study where we're biopsying these children to see what their livers actually look like under the microscope. And half of them have evidence of scarring of the liver, fibrosis of the liver, the early stages of cirrhosis. So when these children end up being adults, they're going to end up, if they don't change their eating and exercise habits, are going to end up with liver failure and either transplant or death.
Either transplant or death. What is causing this in the youth? Well, it's a higher consumption of sugar and fat. Oil or fat is harder on a diabetic than sugar is. So the University of Southern California, many Latino children well on their way to diabetes, heart disease. It's a study done in January 12, 2004. Recent headlines about the health of the nation's youth have raised alarm, but a new study shows that the pervasiveness of the early stages of heart disease and diabetes among Latino children may be particularly disturbing. 3 in 10. 3 out of 10 children. So, afflictions of diabetes. Life expectancy is shortened by 5 to 10 years. And if it starts in early teen, from 17 to 27 years, it contributes to 160,000 deaths each year, 2 to 12 times the risk of heart disease. How much? 2 to 12 times the risk of heart disease, 2 to 4 times the risk of stroke. Number one cause of blindness in adults, a factor in all foot and leg amputations, half of all foot and leg amputations, 60,000 amputations yearly in diabetes. Any given year, 50,000 diabetics are either on dialysis or have had kidney transplants, cause of peripheral neuropathy, increased risk of breast and uterine cancers. Well, what can you do? Here's some very simple things. Numerous studies show that the exercise can both prevent and reduce type 2 diabetes. German study in 1996, increased physical activity delays the onset of non-insulin dependent diabetes or even prevents the disease in about 50% of susceptible individuals. From Medical College of South Carolina in 1998, a study in about 1,500 men and women, researchers found that people who exercise even moderately made a more efficient use of insulin to metabolize food. So even if you could just had time for a stroll, will help. So here's a study done with type 1 diabetes. The difference between type 1 and type 2, type 1 is called juvenile onset diabetes. It usually comes when you're a child, and it's from an infection or an attack of the pancreas, a failure of the pancreas. Type 2 is strictly dietary. So they had them control their blood sugar by their diet, and they had a 76% reduction in diabetic retinopathy, problems with the eyes, 54% reduction in significant kidney disease, 60% reduction in peripheral neuropathy, 35% decrease in cardiovascular risk. And all they did is change how they eat. So instead of eating a piece of pie and then taking more insulin, They didn't eat the pie and took less insulin. Now, when we look at processed foods, here's where we're running into problems with sugar. If we take this particular apple right here and we start to refine it, we have a whole apple, then we make it into applesauce, and then we make it into apple juice. Okay, what is the difference between applesauce and apple juice? Well, with the applesauce, we're usually taking the skin off, so we're starting to refine it. With apple juice, we're taking all the fiber out of it. So this scale shows the sugar level in the blood, and then what happens to that sugar level over a period of a couple hours. So within 20 to 30 minutes, your sugar level has peaked after eating this apple sauce, or apple juice. And it all peaks the same because it's basically the same amount of sugar. Okay? It's natural sugar, fruit sugar. But then what happens is with the apples, within another 30 minutes, the blood sugar has leveled out. With the applesauce, it has a little dip and then pulls and levels out. What that is doing is when your blood sugar gets down too low, then your body initiates what's called the glucose transfer system and pulls sugar that's stored in to keep the blood sugar level up. And with the apple juice, you see you have what's called a low blood sugar reaction or a hypoglycemic reaction. So even though you might be drinking good organic apple juice, you can cause your body to go into a glucose crisis because there's no fiber. What fiber does is it holds on to the sugar and it releases it as insulin demands it. So your body is designed for a whole product. It is not designed for a refined product. So the more you refine something, the more difficult it becomes on the body because it's designed for a much more harder product to handle. So that causes us to have these troubles. Here is a study done with the Zuni land Indians in the United States. And half a century ago, so 50 years ago, diabetes was virtually unknown among these Zuni Indians. But then processed foods, TV, and cars were brought into their area. And now 49% of the Zuni Indians, or 50% of the Zuni Indians over 49, have diabetes. So what was it? Processed foods, because before they were living out of the garden, processed foods, TV, and cars. So processed foods and no exercise. Here is some related problems with drinking cow's milk and children. I throw this in because another slide we're going to look at also talks about cow's milk and diabetes. So allergies, iron deficiency anemia, which milk is a low iron product but a high protein product, so it causes an iron deficiency. Low intelligence, milk sensitivity, early atherosclerosis, which is hardening of the arteries, juvenile diabetes, acne, rheumatoid arthritis, dental decay, and infectious disease. This slide here is, to me, the saddest slide there is. And what they did is they looked at 521 children. 142 of those children just had recent onset juvenile diabetes, which means their pancreas has failed. 100% of those diabetics, that means all 142 of those children, were allergic to cow's milk. Only 3% of the other children weren't, and their allergies were very low compared to the other children. So unfortunately, this doctor thought that he just found the answer, the cure. And he says, we may have uncovered a wonderful strategy to prevent type 1 diabetes. If we are right, it may be the beginning of the end of this terrible disease. Have you ever heard anything about that? Has it been through the newspaper? Is it promoted? No, it's not. But, I don't know of a type 1 diabetic. I have not personally met a type 1 diabetic that wasn't a milk drinker. So what is happening is when you're allergic to the protein in milk, your body builds antibodies. These then, they'll recognize that protein, and when it comes into the system, into the blood, it will attack it and destroy it. But unfortunately, the beta proteins on the outside of the pancreas are almost identical to the protein in cow's milk. So the body gets confused, thinking that the pancreas is what it's allergic to. So the body attacks the pancreas and destroys the pancreas. Sugar. Sugar weakens the white blood cells' ability to destroy bacteria. So 0 teaspoons of sugar, a white T cell, a fighter cell can kill 14 bacteria and then die. If you eat 6 teaspoons of sugar, white sugar, that T cell can only kill 10 bacteria before it dies. If you eat 12 teaspoons, it can kill 5.5. 18 teaspoons, it can kill 2 bacteria before it dies. If you eat 24 teaspoons, it can kill 1 bacteria before it dies. So you have basically pretty much nullified the ability of your immune system to protect you from disease. These are cancers associated with large consumptions of sugar. Colon cancer, rectal cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, prostate cancer, kidney cancer, and cancer of the nervous system. Here are some hidden sugars. In milk, malted milk, like a milkshake, 12 ounces is 42 teaspoons of sugar. So how many bacteria could your T cell kill? None. Because 24 teaspoons, it can only kill 1. If you've got 42 teaspoons, it can't function. You are basically susceptible to any infection that you're around. That's why sometimes you can sit next to somebody in an office or on an airplane and you don't get sick, and the next time you sit next to somebody, boom, you've got it within an hour because you've consumed something that has weakened your immune system where it can't defend you. And bacteria grows rapidly. Soft drinks, 12 ounces, 10 to 12 teaspoons. And the list goes on. Chocolate cake, candy, fruit pie, donuts, jelly, jam. Here is some other places that you find sugar. So Americans consume about 547 sodas a year. There's an average about 16 teaspoons in a can. So here we go. Cocoa Mix is 82% sugar. Coffee Mate, 65% sugar. Shake and Bake barbecue style is 51% sugar. Heinz ketchup is 30% sugar. This is the formula for any ketchup. You can pick a ketchup bottle up and look at it, and it'll tell you that basically it's 30% or 33% sugar. So a serving size is a tablespoon. Every tablespoon's got 1 teaspoon of sugar in it. Hamburger Helpers, 23%. Cool Whip, 21%. Chocolate cake, 15 teaspoons. 1 cup of frozen yogurt, 12 teaspoons. How about Jell-O? It's 83% sugar. So if you eat 6 teaspoons of sugar, you lower your white blood cells' ability to fight pathogens by 25%. If you eat 24 teaspoons, you lower its ability to fight disease by 92%. That's equivalent to 1 piece of pie and a soda.
In fact, each year we spend over $30 billion on diet products and weight loss programs. 2.5 times what we spend on fitness and health. There are pills, drinks, bars. You can lose weight while you sleep, while you watch TV, and while eating everything you want, always pushing the newest way to stay thin without exercise. Some people, however, feel that they have tried everything and see only one remaining option as their last hope for health.
I'm diabetic. 80% of people don't have to take insulin anymore after this. Plus I have hypertension. Hopefully correct that, lose my weight, lose my high blood pressure.
Yeah. This is Bruce Howlett. In a few minutes, his stomach will be surgically reduced to the size of a small apple in a gastric bypass operation.
People with hypertension who are obese, about 75% of them will get rid of their hypertensive medications.
Doctors Adam Naiman and Carl Geisler will be performing the operation. Together they have done more than 500 gastric bypass surgeries, and with their tandem technique, they are setting the industry standard, completing the procedure in less than 30 minutes and sending patients home the following day.
We have established now that the only procedure that really cures diabetes is obesity surgery.
Went blind for a week.
Just went completely, one day out of the blue, you went blind.
I went to work, got to work, drove to work that night, got to work there, couldn't read the charts, and I had to call my supervisor, tell her I couldn't work because I couldn't see what I was doing, and I had to call my wife, have her get a ride to work, pick me up, take me home. And then once I stopped drinking the diet soda, I was just got my sugar back down. I was fortunate enough my eyesight came back and didn't do that much damage to them at that time.
I think it's human nature to seek a drastic solution only when you're faced with a drastic problem.
Oh, I drank 3 or 4 liters a day.
3 or 4, because this is a half gallon. So that means you were drinking probably about 2 gallons of soda a day.
It wasn't unusual for a 2-week time. We buy like 52 liters of soda water.
52 liters every 2 weeks.
And they probably have had to pick him up a couple extra. He drinks more than I do.
Yeah.
I go through about one of those a day.
There's some days I go through 3, 4, 2 liters.
A lot of us don't realize the social stigma that these people face on a daily basis.
1, 2, 3.
That is a drastic solution, isn't it? Eating, drinking, maybe 2.5 gallons of soda a day. So the solution is to go in and have your stomach surgically reduced to the size of an apple. Unfortunately, there's a much easier way of doing that, is to overcome these things, these lifestyle problems. So sugar, sugar, sugar. Dr. Edgar Howell says, sugar is the greatest scourge that has ever been visited upon man in the name of food. I believe it should be outlawed as poison. In 1822, Americans ate 2 teaspoons of sugar a day. In 1870, they ate 11 teaspoons a day. In 1902, they ate 22 teaspoons a day. In 1980, 35 teaspoons a day. And today, they consume 46 teaspoons a day. That is 147 pounds of sugar a year for every man, woman, and child in this country, in that country. That is, somebody's eating more because I eat none. So somebody's consuming a little more than 147 pounds. This is a very interesting study. This is done in Tidewater, Virginia. This was done at a juvenile violent crime facility. It was a jail, prison. So these juveniles are in there for murder, rape, assault with a weapon, and so on and so forth. And what they did was is they went in and they removed all junk food. So they went in all the vending machines, took out all the candy and pop and all that, and they replaced it with bananas, oranges, apples, and so forth. They were not allowed to get any of these sweet foods from home. So this was the result. An 82% reduction in assaults, a 77% reduction in thefts, a 65% reduction in malicious horseplay, and a 55% reduction in refusal to obey orders. Now let me ask you, what would happen to society if we went in and removed all the junk food and replaced it with oranges and bananas? And
the food industry will collapse.
Well, the food industry would collapse, but what kind of society would we have? How many of these juvenile would be in a juvenile crime facility, a violent crime? Would they be committing murder? A reduction in assaults, 82%, a reduction in thefts, a reduction in malicious horseplay, a reduction in refusal to obey orders. Can you imagine the change? So how about your home? How about if we just let this change take place in your home? What about your children? What about your family? What would it be like? Thank you.